Hey, welcome back to Anti-Social Studies. So today in our first of these deep dive videos, I'm going to be talking about the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. So what are some things you need to know beyond just that it was like a place where scholars translated things in the Abbasid Caliphate? I'm going to go through this in 5 slides so you can get a little bit more depth and complexity to add to your AP World History class and essays. So the first person we might want to know about is Caliph al-Mansur. He's the one who built Baghdad. So the Abbasid, sorry, I always want to say Abbasid, but I believe it's the Abbasid, but it's stuck in my head that way. The Abbasid dynasty took over. They actually kind of toppled the Umayyad dynasty. And the Umayyads were really the ones who went out and conquered. They conquered, let me pull out my drawing tool. They're the ones that really conquer from kind of the traditional like Mesopotamian Middle East, right? And they conquer all the way up into Spain, right? And all the way over towards kind of the Indus River and down through Saudi Arabia and that sort of thing. And so when the Abbasids take over from the Umayyads, they really inherit this massive empire and they're more focused on innovation, art, architecture, culture. So the Abbasids are known as the golden age of the Islamic world, or one of the golden ages. And one of the reasons is because of their new city of Baghdad. So they moved the capital from Damascus to be further closer to kind of their new, like the parts of the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire that they took over. And they create this new city called Baghdad, which is like the most modern city in the world at the time. It is a thriving cosmopolitan. It's like the New York City of the late post-classical era, where merchants and scholars and travelers from all over the world come together and are welcomed for the most part. And so Caliph al-Mansur built that city, and one of the things he did was that he founded a palace library where he wanted to collect as many different texts from the ancient and classical world as he could. We're going to see throughout the Abbasid Caliphate a lot of Persian influences. So even though they are an Islamic empire now, they also, because they're much more connected by moving their capital closer to kind of the historic Persian Empire in modern day Iran, they're also really taking a lot of those traditions that came all the way back from the pre-Islamic times of Persian scholarship, Persian art and culture, that sort of thing. So the next caliph you'd want to know is Caliph AlMamoon. He's the one that really put a lot of money and investment and protection into this new house of wisdom. So the one question we have that historians can't really answer is, did the house of wisdom exist? And by that I mean, was it a physical space? Was it actually like a building where scholars showed up and like translated stuff and talked about science? We're not really sure. It could have just been the meeting at the palace library. It could have been parts of a university. But what we do know is that Caliph al-Mamoun was the one who really increased the funding for those scholars, and he really invited and encouraged scholars from all over the world, especially from India, to come and share their knowledge. He personally participated in the excavations of the pyramids at Giza. Like, that's super cool. He commissioned a mapping of the world as they knew it at the time. He founded the first astronomical observatory in the Islamic world. There's kind of 2 reasons why astronomy is one of the areas of science where Muslims excel. The kind of traditional, more simplified reason for that is because they say, well, they need to know how to read the stars and tell direction to know which way is Mecca, to know where to pray. That's probably true, but it's also because the Muslims are like incredible traders and incredible merchants, right? The Islamic world is really the one out of this post-classical era that values merchants the most highly. They see them as this opportunity to spread their power and their influence around the globe. And so again, you need astronomy to be able to travel along these major trading routes. So this as just an example of what a nerd Caliph al-Mamoun was. This is a drawing, a depiction of here's the caliph, and he's negotiating a peace deal with the Byzantine emperor. And as part of the like peace negotiations, he says that like in addition to land and these other things, he wants the Byzantines' original copy of a text by Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals who went on to rule Egypt. So he's like such a nerd. He's like, I'll stop fighting you if you give me this book I really want. I mean, among other things. I just think that's awesome. So what did they do at the House of Wisdom? So the main thing they're known for is being one of the centers of this translation movement. So this movement was happening around the Islamic world. It was also happening in Cordoba, Spain. But the House of Wisdom is one of the main kind of epicenters of this. So essentially, it's like, we're going to get together and we're going to bring all of these texts from the ancient, the classical, the early post-classical empires, and we're going to translate them to like preserve them. And we're going to translate them into Arabic and like keep them safe so that we retain this knowledge. The head of this movement in the House of Wisdom was a Persian poet. So again, that's another piece of evidence pointing to the diversity of the Abbasid Caliphate. It wasn't all necessarily like Arab Muslims that were welcomed into this world. As another example of diversity and tolerance, you had the most prolific translator, nicknamed the Sheikh of the translators, was an Arab Christian doctor, right? And so again, talking about religious tolerance in the Abbasid Caliphate, these all could be used as specific evidence to prove that that's true. I think he alone translated like thousands of works. I think that this Arab physician translated like all of the Greek medical texts, including the works of Hippocrates. And one of the things that I think is a really interesting fact is that, as far as we know, the first work that was translated in the House of Wisdom at Baghdad was a work by Aristotle on like debate and how to like question things and how to discuss these new ideas and new topics. And so I think this is super interesting because it's really great evidence that the Islamic world was really one of the centers of like modernity and innovation and like new ideas and technology. And really, like, the rest of the world is just trying to catch up with them. So one example, if you want an example of a scholar who was really famous and worked at the House of Wisdom, you could talk about AlKhawarizmi. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. His name in the Latin version is Algorithmus. So the algorithm is named after him because he, I don't know much about math, but like wrote some stuff that led people to figure out what an algorithm was. I don't know what an algorithm is, but I know it's important. He also wrote the book on algebra. So algebra had kind of been around. Some people had been figuring these things out, but he writes the definitive book called Kitab al-Jabr, which means like the reunion of broken parts. And that's where we get the name algebra from. This one guy, is also the person who introduced the Hindu numbering system to the Western world. So the Indians were the ones who kind of figured out this numbering system that we use today of like the 1, the 2, the 3. We call it Arabic numerals, but that's actually not correct. They should be Hindu numerals. They were just kind of translated and brought to the attention of Western Europe through these like Arab scholars. He alone went through, they were obsessed with Ptolemy. They went through and corrected. He had made this massive kind of map of all these different trading coordinates around the known world. And Al-Khwarizmi used astronomy and, algorithms maybe, I don't know, to correct and like make sure that these coordinates were exact. And so again, this would also be a really cool piece of evidence to use to talk about the emphasis on trading and innovation in the Abbasid Caliphate. It was really important to the Abbasid leaders that they were able to get out, spread their merchants and other missionaries, for example, around the world to build these connections across the Indian Ocean, around Africa, to gain power and influence and like trading benefits back to the Middle East. Okay, so what happens to the House of Wisdom? It really just declines and falls along with the Abbasid Caliphate. So one of the things that happens is that in its later years, we start to see some of the caliphs shift away from the branch of Islam that the earlier Abbasid caliphs had been following. So they had been following a little bit more like scholarly interpretation of the Quran that allowed for more innovation, that really encouraged people to kind of go out and find these new ideas. Some of the later caliphs become more literal in their interpretation of the Quran, and they encourage a more kind of fundamentalist view of the Quran. And so it's not necessarily that they like ban all learning, but they just don't put in the same amount of sponsorship and support as the earlier caliphs did. But the real reason is the Mongols. It's always the Mongols, right? So when the Mongols take control of Baghdad in 1258, they destroy the House of Wisdom. They destroy all the libraries there. They burn the books, they salt the earth, right? Leave it to the Mongols. There was one of the main scholars that was still around, Nasir al-Din al-Tusi. He was the guy who invented trigonometry. He personally saved over 400,000 manuscripts as the siege of Baghdad was occurring and was able to get them out so that we still have a lot of these translated texts. And so really the reason why the House of Wisdom is really important is that it kind of epitomizes this trend in the late post-classical era of massive states encouraging innovation and encouraging diversity, bringing together people from all around the world to create new things that will benefit the empire. And it's also just a really great example of like how Europe is going to be able to come out of its Middle Ages and rediscover, quote unquote, these Greek and Roman and Indian texts. We really have the Muslims to thank for that, that once the Europeans start interacting with the Islamic world through the Crusades and then eventually through trade, one of the things they're bringing back is this knowledge that's been preserved, that's been lost in medieval Europe for almost 1,000 years since the fall of Rome. So that's the House of Wisdom. I hope that was helpful. Just remember, you can find more resources at my website, antisocialstudies.org. And until next time, have fun WHAPing. See ya.